Okay, imagine this. You are on trial for your life. The charge? Treason. For selling a priceless national treasure to the Nazis. Your only way out is to admit to an even bigger crime, a massive art fraud that fooled the entire world. Now, this isn't some Hollywood script. This is the unbelievable true story of Han van Meegeren, the master forger who had to prove he was a brilliant con man just to avoid the executioner.
So, let's set the scene. It's 1945. The Second World War has just ended in Europe, and in the streets of Amsterdam, there's this feeling of relief, but also a furious hunt for anyone who helped the enemy. This is a time for settling scores, and justice is coming. Fast.
And right in the middle of all this, the authorities show up at a fancy house on a canal. It belongs to this flamboyant and very rich artist named Han van Meegeren. They drag him out and throw him in prison. And the charge is about as serious as it gets: high treason.
So what exactly did he do? Well, investigators uncovered a paper trail. It showed that Van Meegeren had sold what everybody thought was a long-lost masterpiece by the legendary Dutch painter Johannes Vermeer. And the buyer? Oh, it wasn't just anyone. It was Hermann Goering, Hitler's #2 guy and the biggest art thief in the entire Nazi party.
You have to understand, in post-war Holland, selling a piece of your country's soul to a monster like Goering was just unforgivable. So the penalty was simple, and it was final: death. The evidence looked absolutely solid. It really seemed like Van Meegeren was done for. But then, right when he's backed into a corner, facing certain death, Van Meegeren does something incredible. He confesses. But not to treason. No, he confesses to something so outlandish, so completely insane, it's about to turn this entire case upside down. He looks his interrogators dead in the eye and tells them, "That Vermeer painting, the national treasure, it's completely worthless." Why? Because he, Han van Meegeren, painted it himself. He didn't sell out his country, he swindled one of its worst enemies.
I mean, you can just imagine the scene, right? The authorities probably just laughed in his face. It sounded like a desperate lie from a man about to be executed. This painting had been checked out and authenticated by the best art experts in the world. So now Van Meegeren had this new, almost impossible problem. To save his own life, he had to prove he was one of the greatest art forgers who ever lived.
Okay, so how in the world did he do it? This is where the story gets really, really clever. See, creating a good fake isn't just about painting in the right style. You literally have to forge time itself. So how do you make a new painting look, feel, and even test like it's 300 years old? His method was it was a masterclass in deception. He'd start with a real, cheap 17th century canvas and scrape off the old art so he had an authentic base. He ground his own pigments, just like Vermeer would have, but here's the secret sauce, the absolute stroke of genius. He mixed his paints with bakelite, one of the very first plastics. Then he'd literally bake the painting in an oven. The heat hardened the plastic and created this perfect network of aged cracks that would fool anybody. He'd rub a little ink in there to look like centuries of dust, and boom. He hadn't just made a painting, he had chemically engineered a 300-year-old masterpiece. But here's the thing. All that incredible work, that scientific precision, it was never just about the money. I mean, sure, the millions were nice. But for Van Meegeren, the real prize was something much sweeter and way more personal. Good old-fashioned revenge. You see, Van Meegeren was actually a really talented painter. He knew all the techniques of the old masters. But the art world, the critics and the experts, they hated his original stuff. They said it was well painted but uninspired, that it lacked a soul. And that rejection just ate away at him for years, building into this burning desire to make them all look like fools.
And boy, did he get his revenge. The very first major forgery he made was authenticated by a guy named Abraham Bredius, who was the most powerful art critic in the country, one of the very people who had looked down on his career. And Bredius didn't just say it was real, he called it Vermeer's greatest masterpiece. And this just perfectly shows the hypocrisy he was fighting against. When he signed his own name to his work, the critics said, it's uninspired. But when he painted in pretty much the same style and slapped Vermeer's name on it, those same critics called it a work of pure genius. He had proven that they weren't judging the art, they were just judging the signature. And the experts didn't just praise it with words. They praised it with a whole lot of money. A major Dutch museum paid what would be about $6 million today for that very first fake.
Van Meegeren hadn't just fooled the experts. He made them pay a fortune to be made fools of. So all of this leads us to the grand finale, the trial, and it became this massive international spectacle. It was less about the law and more about a single burning question. Who was the bigger fool? The brilliant forger who tricked everyone, or the entire art establishment that fell for it?
The trial was pure theater. I mean, in a move straight out of a movie, Van Meegeren actually painted one last masterpiece right there in the courtroom to prove he could do it. At the same time, scientists were testing the paintings. And yep, they found traces of that bakelite plastic. It was the smoking gun. One by one, the world's top art experts had to get on the stand and admit they'd been had. The treason charge? Thrown right out. In the end, he was convicted of the much smaller crime of simple fraud.
And that's when public opinion did a complete 180. The man who started out as this hated Nazi collaborator was now this clever folk hero. He was the trickster who had pulled a fast one on one of the worst villains in history. He didn't betray his country. He totally conned its enemy.
But this story has one final, crazy twist. Van Meegeren was sentenced to just 1 year in prison for the fraud, but he never served a single day. Just 2 months after the trial, he died of a massive heart attack, which, in a way, cemented his legendary status as the forger who always got the last laugh.
So at the end of the day, who was this guy? Was he just a common criminal who got in over his head? Or was he some kind of brilliant folk hero who exposed the snobbery of the art world and pulled off one of the greatest swindles of all time? Well, that's a question I'm going to leave up to you.